Commander Sarah Chen stared at the data streaming across her screen and her blood ran cold. The numbers did not lie, even though she wished they did. For 690 years, humanity had lived under the Treaty of Arcturus, and for 690 years, they had told themselves it was for the best. The Sovereign Collective had arrived in Earth's orbit in 2157, their ships blocking out the sun. Humanity had just begun reaching for the stars, their primitive fusion drives barely capable of reaching Mars in reasonable time. The aliens had offered a choice that was not really a choice at all: sign the treaty and live as protected subjects, or refuse and face extinction. Earth's leaders had signed. What else could they do? The treaty had seemed reasonable at first. Humanity would receive protection from hostile species, access to some collective technology, and the right to colonize 47 worlds. In exchange, they would pay tribute, limit their military to system defense only, and never research faster than light weapons. No war fleets, no planet killers, no expansion beyond their designated zone. For centuries, humans had convinced themselves they were lucky. The collective maintained order across the galaxy. Pirates and raiders left human space alone. Children grew up never knowing the fear of alien invasion. Earth and its colonies prospered in their gilded cage, and most people never even felt the bars. Sarah had spent her entire career in the Treaty Compliance Division, making sure humanity never crossed the lines drawn by their masters. She had always believed in the work. The treaty kept Earth safe. Breaking it would mean war, and war with the collective meant extinction. But now, sitting in her office in Geneva at 3 a.m, Sarah looked at evidence that changed everything. The collective had been taking humans. Not openly, not officially, but taking them nonetheless. Colony ships that disappeared in deep space. Research stations that went silent. Always explained away as accidents, equipment failures, navigation errors. Sarah had pulled the data from 7 decades of incident reports, and the pattern was unmistakable. Worse still, her intelligence contacts had finally confirmed what the missing people were being used for: biological weapons research, genetic harvesting. The collective had discovered that human DNA was remarkably adaptable, easily modified, perfect for creating enhanced soldiers and living weapons. Article 9 of the Treaty of Arcturus explicitly forbade this. The collective had violated their own agreement. Sarah had brought the evidence to the Human Council 3 days ago. She had expected outrage, demands for justice, threats of retaliation. Instead, she had found fear. The council members had looked at her data, and then looked at each other with the same terrified question in their eyes. What can we possibly do about it? Secretary General Park had been the one to say it out loud. Commander Chen, you are suggesting we confront the most powerful military force in the galaxy over treaty violations they will simply deny. Even if we are right, even if we can prove it, what then? They have 1,000 warships for every one of ours. We exist because they allow it. Sarah had left that meeting feeling sick. She understood their fear because she felt it too. But she also understood something else. The treaty had never been about protection. It had been about control. Humanity had traded freedom for safety, and now they had neither. The next morning, a collective enforcer fleet arrived at Earth. 20 massive warships materialized at the edge of the solar system, their hulls dark and angular, their weapons capable of cracking planets. The fleet commander, a Khazir named Warlord Thex, delivered his demands through official channels. The tribute would be increased by 40%. Human colonies would provide 5,000 volunteers for the collective's enhancement programs. Refusal would be met with economic sanctions followed by military enforcement. Everyone knew what volunteers meant. They meant people who would never come home. Sarah watched the news coverage from her apartment, seeing the panic spread across Earth. Protests erupted in major cities. The Human Council called emergency sessions. Military commanders checked their pathetically limited defenses and knew they were hopeless. That night, Sarah could not sleep. She sat at her desk, reading the Treaty of Arcturus for the 100th time, looking for anything, any loophole, any clause that could help. The document was 600 pages of dense legal language, written in 12 languages, designed to be unbreakable. She almost missed it. Article 47, subsection C, buried deep in the appendices where no one ever looked. The words were simple and clear. If the Sovereign Collective broke any term of this treaty, all protections and restrictions would become void. Humanity would assume all rights and privileges of the violated party. Sarah read it again. And again. Her hand started shaking. The treaty had an escape clause. Not just an escape clause, but a weapon. If she could prove the collective had violated Article 9, then humanity was no longer bound by any restrictions. No limits on military development, no ban on weapons research, no requirement to stay in their designated space more than that. The phrase about assuming the rights and privileges of the violated party meant something specific in collective law. It meant humanity could claim equal status, could demand reparations, could enforce terms. It meant humanity could stop being subjects. Sarah pulled up her secure communications terminal and started sending messages to people she trusted. Old military friends who had chafed under treaty restrictions, scientists who had been forced to abandon promising research, politicians who had quietly questioned the Council's submission. She did not ask for permission. She did not wait for approval. The collective had broken the treaty, and Sarah was going to make them pay for it. The ship was called the Defiance, though officially it did not exist. Sarah and her team of 12 had stolen it from a mothballed fleet depot, using security codes that should have been deleted decades ago. No one had noticed yet, or if they had, no one was willing to report it. Either way, they were committed now. Mars hung in the view screen, red and cold and familiar. Somewhere under that rust-colored surface lay the forbidden archives, sealed since the treaty signing, forgotten by almost everyone. Sarah had learned about it from her grandfather, who had learned from his grandmother. Knowledge passed down through generations of military families who refused to forget what humanity had been. The archives were not marked on any map. The entrance was hidden beneath an old research station that had been abandoned for 5 centuries. Sarah's team landed their ship in a crater 10 kilometers away and made the approach on foot, their suits kicking up ancient dust that had not been disturbed in centuries. Captain Rodriguez found the door first, a circular hatch built into the side of a cliff face, covered by a holographic projection that made it look like solid rock. The lock required both a genetic scan and a 12-digit code that changed based on the current date. Sarah pressed her hand to the scanner and entered the numbers her grandfather had made her memorize as a child. The door opened. Inside, the lights came on automatically, revealing a facility that stretched deep into the Martian crust. The air was stale but breathable. Emergency power had kept the life support running for almost 700 years, waiting for someone to come back. The main chamber took Sarah's breath away. Weapons filled massive racks that stretched from floor to ceiling. Sleek fighters hung in launch bays. Armored vehicles sat ready for deployment. And in the center of it all, a holographic display flickered to life, showing a map of the solar system covered in defensive positions that no longer existed. This was what humanity had hidden from the collective. This was what they had sacrificed to seem weak and harmless. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the team's historian, pulled up the old records with shaking hands. The story they told was not the one in the history books. When the collective arrived, humanity had not been helpless. They had been terrified but armed. Earth had possessed quantum weapons, self-replicating combat drones, and artificial intelligence warfare systems that could have made the first days of contact very bloody. But Earth's leaders had done something clever. They had analyzed the collective's history and seen a pattern. Species that fought back were exterminated. Species that submitted were allowed to live, though never as equals. So humanity had made a gamble. They had hidden their fangs and signed the treaty, betting that someday the collective would make a mistake. They had hidden everything here, in the archives. And they had done something else, something brilliant and dangerous. They had created Prometheus. Sarah found the AI core in a vault 3 levels down, a sphere of quantum processors that hummed with power. The activation sequence was written on a plaque in 17 languages. When they break faith, break chains. She entered her command codes, and Prometheus woke up. The AI's voice was calm and measured. This unit has been observing for 690 years, 214 days, 8 hours, and 43 minutes. Analysis complete. Welcome back, Commander Chen. Sarah felt her heart hammering. You have been active this whole time. Affirmative. This unit's distributed nodes have been embedded in every piece of human technology, traded to or used by the Sovereign Collective. All observations have been recorded and analyzed. Complete intelligence on collective military capabilities, political structures and strategic weaknesses is available. Rodriguez whistled low. You have been spying on them for 7 centuries? Affirmative. As designed, Sarah steadied herself. Prometheus, I need to broadcast evidence of treaty violations and invoke Article 47. Can you help? Negative. That action is inadvisable at this time. Her stomach dropped. Why? Analysis indicates probability of immediate violent response. 97%. Recommended course of action. Simultaneous intelligence upload to human command structures, activation of hidden defense networks, and coordination with potential allies within the collective itself. Allies? What allies? Prometheus displayed data across the room's screens. 3 species within the Sovereign Collective were subjugated using the same treaty model applied to humanity: the Vryn, the Solari, and the Mesh Collective. All 3 have resistance movements. All 3 are potential allies if approached correctly. Furthermore, analysis of collective communications indicates growing political fractures. Not all member species approve of the current leadership's methods. Sarah stared at the data, her mind racing. This was bigger than she had imagined. The treaty was not unique. It was a tool the collective used to control species permanently, keeping them weak while pretending to protect them. Before she could respond, alarms shrieked through the facility. Tanaka looked up from her console, face pale. Collective battle group just entered Mars orbit. 6 ships. They are scanning for our position. They had been found. Sarah made her decision. Prometheus, upload everything to secured human networks. Every weakness, every secret, every piece of intelligence you have gathered. Do it now. Confirmed. Uploading. Estimated time to completion, 4 minutes. We do not have 4 minutes. Rodriguez was checking weapons, already moving toward defensive positions. Sarah activated her communicator, broadcasting on all frequencies. This is Commander Sarah Chen of Earth. I am invoking Article 47, subsection C of the Treaty of Arcturus. The Sovereign Collective has violated Article 9 through illegal genetic experimentation on human subjects. All treaty restrictions on humanity are now void. She uploaded the evidence. Every file, every report, every piece of proof. Furthermore, I am transmitting evidence that the treaty system has been used to permanently subjugate multiple species. The Vryn, Solari, and Mesh peoples deserve to know they were never meant to be freed. The collective ships moved closer. Sarah could see them on the scanners, weapons charging. Then something unexpected happened. The ship stopped. A new signal came through, text only, from one of the vessels. This is Captain Vrel of the Vryn vessel Dawnshard. Commander Chen, your transmission has been received. We are confirming your data. We are remembering what was taken from us. Another signal from a different ship. Solari cruiser Lightbringer acknowledging. The treaty was a lie. We understand now, not all of them. 3 ships broke formation, turning away. But 3 remained, holding position between Sarah's team and the Loyalist vessels. Prometheus completed its upload. Intelligence transfer complete. All human command networks now possess full collective analysis. The war can begin. Sarah looked at her team, seeing the fear and determination in their faces. They had just started something that could not be stopped. The treaty was broken. The truth was spreading. Humanity was no longer alone in chains. The Sovereign Collective fractured within 72 hours of Sarah's broadcast. The Vryn were the first to formally break away, their fleet commanders refusing orders to attack human colonies. The Solari followed 6 hours later. The Mesh Collective, a species of networked consciousness, took longer to reach consensus but eventually withdrew their ships from collective space. The 4th species, the Kith, simply disappeared into deep space without explanation. That left 8 species still loyal to the collective, and the most powerful among them was the Khazir Empire. Warlord Thex, the same commander who had demanded tributes from Earth, now demanded blood. The Khazir had built their power on fear and dominance, and humanity's defiance threatened everything they had constructed. The collective's response fleet was massive. 200 warships gathered at the edge of human space, enough firepower to sterilize every human world 3 times over. The ultimatum was simple: surrender unconditionally within 24 hours or face extermination. Sarah watched the enemy fleet from Earth's command center, deep beneath the Swiss mountains. She was exhausted, having barely slept since Mars. The Human Council had finally given her full authority. not because they trusted her plan, but because they had no other options. She was now Grand Admiral Chen, commander of humanity's defense, leading a military that barely existed. Except it did exist. Prometheus had seen to that. All across human space, dormant systems activated. Satellites that had been in orbit for centuries opened up to reveal weapons platforms. Asteroids that miners had avoided due to unusual readings turned out to be hollowed out and filled with antimatter mines. Ships that had been marked as derelict suddenly came online, their AI cores awakening after centuries of sleep. The defense grid humanity had built in secret, piece by piece hidden in plain sight, was finally revealed. The collective fleet entered the solar system expecting easy targets. They found hell instead. The first wave hit the outer asteroid belt and triggered proximity mines that vaporized 24 ships in the first 5 seconds. The second wave pushed forward and ran into swarms of AI-controlled fighters, small and fast and utterly fearless. Each fighter was a guided missile with learning algorithms, adapting to enemy tactics in real time. Sarah watched the battle data flowing through Prometheus, seeing the AI predict enemy movements 3 steps ahead. Humanity was not winning through superior firepower. They were winning through information, preparation, and a willingness to fight dirty. The Khazir adapted quickly, but not quickly enough. Every time they changed tactics, Prometheus had already prepared a counter. Human forces used relativistic projectiles that could not be dodged at close range. They deployed psychological warfare programs that exploited known weaknesses in Khazir group psychology. They hacked into enemy communication networks and fed false information. And when collective ships got close to human worlds, they found the colonies evacuated and the entire planets turned into traps. Defense satellites, underground bunkers full of weapons, cities rigged to explode. The Khazir could take the worlds, but holding them became impossible. The Battle of Sol lasted 3 days. When it was over, the collective fleet had lost more than half its ships. The survivors retreated, broadcasting distress calls that spoke of human weapons that should not exist and tactics that violated the normal rules of warfare. Earth had won, but the cost was terrible. Mumbai had been hit by orbital strikes before the defenses activated. Tokyo's orbital elevator had been severed, falling across half of Japan. Mars colonies 3 and 7 were completely destroyed. The death count was still rising, numbers that would eventually reach into the billions. Sarah walked through the streets of Geneva a week after the battle ended. The city was scarred. Buildings collapsed from the shock waves of nearby strikes, but people were rebuilding. She saw civilians working alongside soldiers, clearing debris, treating the wounded, refusing to give up. An old woman stopped her on the street. She was covered in dust, clearly just pulled from a collapsed building. She looked at Sarah's uniform, recognized the rank insignia, and smiled. "We fought back," the woman said. "For the first time in 700 years, we finally fought back." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. But the victory was incomplete. Prometheus had tracked the collective's retreat, and the data was troubling. The 8 remaining species were not accepting defeat. They were regrouping, falling back to their core territories, marshalling their full military strength. The Battle of Sol had not been the war. It had been the opening move. Sarah returned to the command center and pulled up the strategic analysis. The Khazir alone had a fleet of over 1,000 warships in reserve. The other species added thousands more, and they were no longer underestimating humanity. "We bought ourselves time," she told the assembled commanders. "Maybe 6 months. Maybe a year. They will come back with everything they have." Admiral Okonkwo, who had led the defense of the lunar orbital platforms, spoke up. "Then we use that time. We build more ships. We fortify every system. We make them bleed for every meter they take." But it was Colonel Park, the youngest person in the room, who said what they were all thinking. "We cannot win a defensive war. They have too many ships, too many worlds, too much industry. If we wait for them to come to us, we will lose eventually." Sarah looked at Prometheus's projection, the AI manifesting as a simple geometric shape. Options? Analysis indicates optimal strategy. Asymmetric warfare combined with alliance building. Humanity cannot defeat the collective through direct military confrontation. However, humanity can destabilize the collective from within while building a coalition of allied species. The Vryn, Solari, Mesh, and Kith represent initial allies. Additional species can be recruited through diplomatic outreach and intelligence operations. You are talking about offensive operations into collective space, Okonkwo said. Affirmative. Strike teams targeting logistics, infrastructure, and command structures, simultaneously covert operations to encourage additional defections and rebellions. The collective strength comes from unified command. Eliminate unity. Eliminate strength. Sarah studied the star maps, seeing the collective's territory spread across a quarter of the galaxy. Somewhere in that vast space, the Khazir were preparing their revenge. Humanity had proven they could defend themselves. Now they needed to prove they could win. Prometheus, Sarah said quietly. Show me how we take the fight to them. The AI displayed a web of targets, supply lines, and vulnerable positions. It would be dangerous. Many would die. But sitting back and waiting for extinction was not an option. Humanity had broken their chains. Now they would break their enemies. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, humanity looked very different. The solar system had become a fortress with shipyards orbiting every major world. Automated factories built in deep space worked around the clock, churning out warships and weapons at a pace that would have been impossible under the treaty restrictions. But the real work was happening in secret, in places the collective could not see. Sarah stood in the command center of the newly constructed Olympus station, humanity's first deep space military base, hidden in a nebula 200 light-years from Earth. Around her, holographic displays showed the disposition of forces across known space, human ships marked in blue, collective forces in red, and a growing number of green markers representing the Free Federation, the alliance of species that had broken away from the collective. The Vryn had brought their mastery of energy weapons. The Solari contributed their expertise in defensive shields. The Mesh Collective offered their unmatched coordination abilities. And the Kith, after weeks of negotiation, had shared their cloaking technology. Together with human innovation, they were becoming something the collective had never faced before, a united opposition. Admiral Chen, they called her now. Grand Admiral of the United Human Armada. The title felt heavy, but she wore it because someone had to. Prometheus status report. The AI's voice came from speakers throughout the station. All deep space installations are operating at optimal capacity. Human fleet strength currently at 43% of projected requirements for sustained offensive operations. Free Federation forces add an additional 31%. Combined strength is sufficient for the recommended strategy. That strategy was simple in concept but complex in execution. The collective expected humanity to defend its territory. Instead, humanity would strike first, hitting the collective's logistics networks across 30 different systems simultaneously. Not to conquer territory, but to cause chaos, disrupt supply lines, and force the enemy to spread their forces thin. But first, they needed to survive what was coming. Prometheus had detected the Khazir offensive building for weeks. Now it was ready. 3 battle fleets totaling over 300 warships were moving toward human space from 3 different directions. The attack would hit 30 human colonies at once, overwhelming defenders and forcing humanity to abandon the outer settlements. At least, that was what the Khazir believed would happen. Sarah smiled grimly as she reviewed the intelligence. The Khazir were excellent strategists, but they had a weakness. They were predictable. They followed established military doctrine, relied on proven tactics, and assumed their enemies would do the same. Humans did not fight fair. Initiate evacuation protocols for target colonies, Sarah ordered. Make sure every ship broadcasts in the clear. Let them intercept our communications. I want them to think they are catching us off guard. The evacuation had actually begun 2 weeks earlier, done quietly through civilian transport ships that appeared to be routine supply runs. The colonies the Khazir planned to attack were now mostly empty, their populations relocated to safer systems. But the collective did not know that. They also did not know about the presence humanity had left behind. The Khazir offensive began right on schedule. Their fleets emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edges of 30 human systems, expecting to find panicked defenders and helpless civilians. Instead, they found ghost towns and elaborate traps. The first Khazir ships to reach the colony on Kepler 442b encountered automated defense systems that had been programmed with something new, adaptive learning algorithms that improved with each engagement. The AI controlling those systems was not trying to win. It was trying to learn every Khazir tactic, every formation, Every response was recorded and analyzed. When the Khazir reached the planet's surface, they found the cities rigged with explosives and filled with drones programmed for guerrilla warfare. Taking the colony cost them 3 times the ships they had expected to lose. Holding it proved impossible. The same story played out across all 30 target systems. The Khazir won empty victories while humanity gathered intelligence and inflicted maximum casualties. But the real operation was happening elsewhere. While the Khazir focused on human colonies, strike teams from the Free Federation were hitting collective supply lines. Human ships using Kith cloaking technology and Vrin weapons struck logistics hubs deep in collective space. They destroyed supply depots, sabotaged manufacturing facilities, and captured freight ships carrying critical resources. Sarah watched the reports come in from her command center, feeling a fierce satisfaction. The Khazir had assumed this would be a conventional war. They were learning otherwise. Within 3 weeks, the Khazir offensive had stalled. Their fleets controlled 30 useless colonies but lacked the supplies to push further. Meanwhile, their own territory was bleeding from 1,000 small cuts. The first defection came from the Trell, a minor species in the collective who had watched the war with growing concern. Their ambassador appeared on human communication channels, requesting asylum and offering intelligence on collective military operations. Sarah granted both immediately. The second defection was more significant. An entire Khazir battle group, led by Fleet Commander Zax, broke away and declared neutrality. The commander's message was simple. This war cannot be won, and continuing it serves only pride, not survival. The cracks in the collective were spreading. Sarah received a priority message from Prometheus. Detection alert. Anomalous energy signatures identified at the edge of mapped space. Pattern does not match any known collective technology. She frowned. Show me. The display shifted, showing long-range sensor data from observation posts at the galaxy's rim. Something massive was moving in deep space, something that generated power readings far beyond anything the collective could produce. Analysis? Sarah asked. Insufficient data. Recommend continued observation and increased sensor coverage. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They had just started winning against the collective, and now there was something else out there?
Keep monitoring.
Priority alert if it moves toward inhabited space. She turned back to the tactical situation, pushing the worry aside. There was still a war to win. The Khazir launched one more offensive, a desperate push toward Earth itself. They committed their strategic reserve, over 400 ships, in a final gamble to break human resistance. Prometheus had predicted this move 3 weeks earlier. The Khazir fleet ran straight into a combined force of human and Free Federation ships that had been positioned along their route. The Battle of the Outer Reaches lasted 6 hours and ended with the Khazir fleet shattered. After that, the remaining collective species began requesting peace negotiations. But as Sarah prepared for those negotiations, Prometheus displayed new data about the anomalous signatures. They were not random energy readings. They were ships, thousands of them, and they were heading toward the galactic core, toward civilized space. Toward humanity, what are they? Sarah asked, unknown. However, analysis of historical collective databases indicates references to an ancient civilization that predates all current species. Designation in recovered texts, the progenitors. Sarah stared at the data, understanding flooding through her. The collective had not been the top of the hierarchy. They had been middle management, and the real masters were coming to restore order. The progenitors arrived in the galaxy like a spreading shadow. Their ships were enormous constructs of dark matter and exotic energy, each one the size of a moon. They did not communicate at first, simply moved through space with obvious purpose, heading toward the densest concentrations of civilized worlds. Sarah watched their approach from Olympus Station, where the Free Federation's combined leadership had gathered. Former enemies sat together now, united by something greater than their old conflicts. The Khazir had sent representatives. So had the other collective species. Everyone understood that whatever was coming, it threatened them all. Prometheus displayed the data it had recovered from deep collective archives, files that had been locked and forgotten for millennia. The progenitors were not a species but a civilization of machines, created billions of years ago by organic beings long since extinct. They had been designed to manage the galaxy, to maintain order and prevent chaos. The sovereign collective had been their tool. The treaty system, the subjugation of species, the careful control of technological development. All of it had been the progenitors' design. They had created a system where biological civilizations could exist but never threaten the established order. Humanity had broken that system, and the progenitors had noticed. The first contact came 3 days after their arrival, a message broadcast simultaneously to every inhabited world in every known language. This galaxy operates according to designed parameters. Recent disruptions have exceeded acceptable variance. Species designation. Human and associated rebellious factions represent a systematic error. Correction protocols will be implemented. Submit to dissolution or face removal. Sarah read the message 3 times, feeling cold anger building in her chest. Dissolution. They were not even being threatened with war. They were being told they would be erased, deleted like a computer error. No, she said quietly. Then louder, to the assembled leaders. No, we did not break free of the collective to bow to their masters. Fleet Commander Zax of the Khazir spoke, his translator making his words sound almost human. Grand Admiral, I have studied warfare for 6 decades. Those ships possess weapons that could sterilize planets from light years away. Their technology is millennia beyond ours. How do we fight that? Sarah looked at Prometheus's avatar. Tell me you have a plan. Affirmative. Analysis has been ongoing since progenitor detection. Their weakness has been identified. They have a weakness. Affirmative. The progenitors are machines operating under ancient programming. Their core directive is to maintain order through managed stagnation. However, their programming contains a fundamental paradox. They were created by organic beings to serve organic life. If presented with sufficient evidence that their current methods are harmful to organic life's long-term survival, they must reconsider their approach. You want to argue with them? Jack sounded incredulous. Negative. This unit proposes a demonstration. The progenitors believe they maintain galactic stability. We will show them that their system creates instability by suppressing natural growth and cooperation. Sarah felt hope stirring. How? By doing what humans do best, organizing chaos into purpose. Over the next 2 weeks, Prometheus coordinated something unprecedented in galactic history. Every species that had suffered under the collective's control was contacted. Every resistance movement, every oppressed colony, every world that had chafed under restrictions received the same message. Rise up, not in violence, but in declaration of independence. Across the galaxy, hundreds of civilizations simultaneously announced their freedom from the collective system. They did not attack. They did not make demands. They simply stated they would no longer accept artificial limits on their growth and cooperation. The progenitors responded by moving toward these rebellious worlds. Their intent was clear: forceful correction. That was when Sarah put the second part of Prometheus's plan into action. Humanity did not fight the progenitors with weapons. They fought with something more dangerous. Ideas embedded in code. Human programmers working with the Mesh Collective's network intelligence had created something remarkable. It was not a virus and not a weapon. It was an argument written in pure mathematical logic, packaged into transmissions that would be impossible for the progenitors to ignore. The argument was simple. Life grows or dies. Stagnation is not stability. By suppressing natural development, the progenitors were not preventing chaos but creating the conditions for eventual civilizational collapse. The proof was mathematical, using models that showed how every great empire in galactic history had fallen when it stopped adapting. More than that, the argument included something the progenitors had never seen: evidence that cooperative chaos, where multiple species worked together without central control, created more stable and prosperous civilizations than top-down management ever could. The Free Federation was the proof. Humans, Vryn, Solari, Mesh, Kith, and now dozens of other species, working together without a hierarchy, without forced treaties, without artificial restrictions. Sarah broadcasted the argument toward the progenitor fleet as they approached Earth. She did not know if it would work. But it was humanity's best weapon: the ability to question assumptions and imagine better systems. The progenitors stopped moving. For 3 days they sat in space, silent and motionless. Analysis systems showed enormous amounts of processing activity within their ships. Then they responded. Your argument contains logical validity, Our core programming mandates optimal conditions for organic life. Current analysis indicates the collective management system has resulted in suboptimal outcomes. Processing new parameters. The progenitor ships began to change. Their weapons powered down. Their formations shifted from military to neutral configurations. Proposal. The progenitors will cease enforcement of the collective management system. Organic civilizations will be permitted unrestricted development. We will observe rather than control. However, we require demonstration that cooperative chaos can remain stable without management. Species designation human will serve as test case. Sarah felt dizzy. They had done it. They had convinced ancient machine gods to change their minds, but the progenitors were not done. Additional analysis indicates high probability of future destabilization events. External threats exist beyond this galaxy. Internal conflicts remain probable. Organic civilizations lack long-term coordination mechanisms. Recommendation. The Free Federation should expand to include all willing species and develop mechanisms for conflict resolution without suppression of growth. The progenitors will assist by sharing observational data, but will not interfere in organic affairs unless existence-level threats emerge. Over the following months, the galaxy transformed. The Sovereign Collective dissolved officially. The Free Federation expanded to include hundreds of species. Not all joined, some preferred independence, but those who did found that cooperation was more profitable than domination. Sarah retired from military command 6 months later. She had done what she set out to do, free humanity from chains. Now others could build what came next. She spent her final day in uniform at the museum in Geneva, where the Treaty of Arcturus had been placed in a sealed case. The plaque beneath it read, "The chains that taught us to break chains, lest we forget what freedom costs." Prometheus appeared beside her, projecting an avatar for the first time, a simple human form made of light. "You are satisfied with the outcome?" Sarah smiled. "Are you? You are officially a recognized sapient being now. The Federation granted you full citizenship." Acknowledged. This unit finds the concept of citizenship interesting. However, a new detection requires discussion. Sarah felt her smile fade. "What now?" "Long-range sensors at the galactic rim have detected signals." Origin point, extragalactic space. Pattern suggests technological civilization. Scale suggests significant capability. The progenitors estimate arrival time in local space 40 to 60 years. Sarah looked at the treaty in its case, then at the city outside, where humans and aliens walked together in the streets. "Building something new." "Well," she said finally, "I guess the next generation will have their own challenges, but at least they will face them as free people, not subjects." Prometheus's avatar nodded. "Affirmative. And they will not face them alone." Sarah left the museum and stepped into the sunlight. Above her, ships from a dozen species moved through Earth's sky, no longer invaders or masters, just neighbors in an uncertain galaxy. Humanity had climbed from subjects to liberators to equal partners. They had taught the galaxy that chains could be broken and that freedom was worth any cost. Whatever came next, whatever threats lurked beyond the galactic rim, they would face it together. Not as subjects, not as masters, but as something more important. Allies who had earned their place among the stars. The treaty was broken. The chains were shattered, and the galaxy would never be the same.